I sat down when we set up the table.
Bill, can you lift heavy things?
No, to a certain extent.
We gotta unload that sound system.
We are on the air.
Where's
Okay.
it at?
It's in the back of my vehicle.
Oh, yeah, we can get it.
Well, what's the matter with this young thing?
Well, it's gonna be a 2-people job.
Oh, okay.
Is it just that one from in there?
Yeah.
I can get it.
The one off the stage.
Take the week off, Bill. You deserve it. Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. Okay, we're on chapter 7 of Hosea. Trucking along at a pretty good pace. I think we're still technically behind because I want to say the first chapter up into 2 lessons. Never made that back up. But, at some point, we're going to make it up or we won't. And we'll just turn this 14-chapter book into 15 lessons and break my tradition. But before we begin, I will say, I mentioned when we wrapped up chapter 6 last week that a lot of, commentators, if you're reading a commentary and, they break it up sort of section by section, they will lump in verse 11 with the first half of verse 1 from chapter 7. So it would read something like, "Alas, O Judah, a harvest is appointed for you. When I return the captives of my people, when I would have healed Israel, then the iniquity of Ephraim was uncovered and the wickedness of Samaria." They break it right there. And then the second half of verse 1 of chapter 7 would begin a new section. And so, before we sort of dig into what's on your paper and before we sort of start reading chapter 7, I'll just sort of talk about this. This isn't a huge thing one way or the other, but it's a little interesting. There's a little debate as to where the emphasis exactly should be placed in verse 1 of chapter 7. If the emphasis should be placed on the whole would have aspect, when I would have healed Israel. And breaking down the 2 different ways to emphasize different elements of this verse, a commentator wrote basically, okay, if we're emphasizing the would have part, it would basically mean something like, I have many times wanted to heal Israel. I could not do it because of their iniquity. So you have that option. Or maybe the emphasis should be placed on the exposing of Ephraim and Samaria. So when I would have healed Israel, then the iniquity of Ephraim was uncovered and the wickedness of Samaria. So if you're emphasizing that same commentator says it would be something like, the restoration of the nation will involve the exposure and the healing of their sins. Also worth noting is that the whole would have translation is pretty questionable. A lot of people don't even know, that is a good translation. A lot of people say it should basically be something like, when I heal Israel, or something along those lines. But going off of what I argued for last week, that we know historically only Judah had their captives returned, or as the NIV translates it, their fortunes restored. But at the same time, we've seen in other books in the Minor Prophets how even the North still had a spiritual restoration promised to the remnant, right? I think either option kind of works, and there's probably some truth to both emphases, right? The bottom line ultimately is that Israel, both north and south, even though, Ephraim and Samaria are specifically northern locations, both, all of Israel's sin, north and south, will be exposed. And right, the whole focus on Ephraim and Samaria, it makes sense that Hosea is going to focus in on that because he's talking to the northern kingdom. He's talking to Israel. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and actually read the 16 verses of chapter 7. So starting in verse 1, once again, when I would have healed Israel, then the iniquity of Ephraim was uncovered, and the wickedness of Samaria, for they have committed fraud. A thief comes in, a band of robbers takes spoil outside. They do not consider in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their own deeds have surrounded them. They are before my face. They make a king glad with their wickedness, and princes with their lies. They are all adulterers, like an oven heated by a baker. He ceases stirring the fire after kneading the dough, until it is leavened. In the day of our king, princes have made him sick, inflamed with wine. He stretched out his hand with scoffers. They prepare their heart like an oven while they lie in wait. Their baker sleeps all night. In the morning it burns like a flaming fire. They are all hot like an oven. All have devoured their judges. All their kings have fallen. None among them calls upon me. Ephraim has mixed himself among the peoples. Ephraim is a cake unturned. Aliens have devoured his strength, but he does not know it. Yes, gray hairs are here and there on him, yet he does not know it. And the pride of Israel testifies to his face, but they do not return to the Lord their God, nor seek him for all this. Ephraim also is like a silly dove without sense. They call to Egypt. They go to Assyria. Wherever they go, I will spread my net on them. I will bring them down like birds of the air. I will chastise them according to what their congregation has heard. Woe to them, for they have fled from me. Destruction to them, because they have transgressed against me, though I redeemed them. Yet they have spoken lies against me. They do not cry out to me with their heart when they wailed on their beds. They assemble together for grain and new wine. They rebel against me. Though I disciplined and strengthened their arms, yet they devise evil against me. They return, but not to the Most High. They are like a treacherous bow. Their princes shall fall by the sword. For the cursing of their tongue, this shall be their derision in the land of Egypt. So, okay. There's not a title for this first bullet point. And when we get to the part that is your blank, I will try to emphasize that. But if you're paying attention, then you'll probably pick up on it before I do. That's where you have to fill something in. So, right off the bat, in 7:1, 7:2, 7:1 anyway, we have more of the same from what we've seen elsewhere in the minor prophets, right? I mean, it's not even taking into account the first half of 7:1, just the second half. You know, they've committed fraud. A thief comes in. A band of robbers takes spoil outside. I mean, we've seen a lot of this before. We've seen general condemnation of wickedness before. And we've even seen condemnation of these same type of sins before. I want to say we've even seen condemnation of these same types of sins before already in Hosea. So it's kind of a lot of more of the same. When things really get interesting, though, is in 7:2. And this is not your fill in the blank portion, so you're going to have to listen for a little while before we get to that. Even though I did put that in here, it's because it relates to the fill in the blank portion. But this is where things get interesting, right? It says, they do not consider in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. So this is somewhat unique, right? This, 7:1b, the last half of 7:1, kind of seen it before. Not to say it's not important. There's just not a lot there. 7:2 is where things get interesting. This is kind of unique. They do not consider in their hearts, I remember all their wickedness, right? I mean, we've seen condemnation for people who just straight up don't care at all about their wickedness, right? You lie, you cheat, you steal, you murder, all sorts of sexual sin, whatever, and you just don't care at all. We've seen condemnation of that. We've seen condemnation for people who think God won't punish them for their wickedness, right? It's not that they don't care in the sense that, people today sin and they don't care because they don't believe in God. But, we've also seen in the minor prophets people who believe in God and worship God, not in a true sense, but, in some sense. And they just think, well, I'm above judgment because, well, God's not going to judge me because I'm an Israelite, or God's not going to judge me because I'm a priest, or whatever, right? We've seen condemnation for, people who Well, that was it. Yeah. For people who don't care about their wickedness, or for people who think God's not going to punish them for their wickedness. And then now, right, what's unique about 7:2 is we have condemnation for people who don't realize that God remembers all of their wickedness, right? And aside from the obvious here of, these people are assuming, well, God only remembers my last 10 sins, for an example, right? Because it says, they do not consider in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. I mean, aside from the very face value reading of like, they're not taking into account that God's not just remembering the last sin you committed or the last 10 sins you committed, but he knows every sin you've committed, right? There is actually something really cool here historically, and there's more at play than you would probably pick up from just a face value reading. And it actually makes a lot of sense given what we've seen so far in the book of Hosea, right? Think about Israel's religious syncretism that we've been talking about pretty much every lesson, right? Something old, something new, something pagan, something true, right? We're just throwing it all together and seeing whatever sticks. Canaanite religion in that day, pagan religion, it was all about one's own experience with God, right? There was very little to no importance placed on God or the gods or whatever, right? As being present throughout all of history. It's just sort of, you have an experience with Baal or Asherah or whatever pagan god it is. And so there wasn't really any sort of communal aspect to worship throughout history anyway. Also, what this led to was that any sort of moral code that there would be associated with these pagan religions was kind of just up to interpretation. It was up to every individual. And that is your blank. There's very little to no importance placed on God or God's being, I'm trying to find the exact word, present throughout all of history. And then the moral code was kind of up to every individual, right? So it's a very individualistic religion. And so God here in Hosea chapter 7, verse 2, or verse 1, let me backtrack a little bit. He's calling out the whole of Israel, right? Fraud, theft, robbery, all these things. But Israel, verse 2, doesn't realize God remembers all of their wickedness, right? Corporate wickedness, right? So, Hosea is coming along, the wickedness of Samaria, the iniquity of Ephraim, it's going to be uncovered. What have they done? They committed fraud. The thieves come in. The band of robbers take their spoil. Israel's hearing this and they're saying, right, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not, committing fraud. I'm not thieving or robbing, right? And God says, right, they do not consider that I remember all their wickedness, right? There's this corporate aspect to worship, and God is condemning corporate sins of Israel. It isn't just the top percentile being condemned here, right? We talk about this top-down problem. It's never just the kings and the princes being called out, or the priests, for that matter, being called out, right? Like it says here in Hosea, go back a few chapters, like people, like priests. So, the people were just as guilty, even if they weren't necessarily committing these exact same type of sins. It's the whole nation, right? Also, God isn't just addressing some form of immorality, but he's addressing every form of immorality, right? But ultimately, God's message falls on deaf ears. Why? Because, once again, the people don't realize that God remembers and sees all. So much so, right, that it will go on to say that God's, the last half of, the last half of verse 2, their own deeds have surrounded them there before my face. right? So they're not realizing that God remembers and God sees all sin, corporate sin throughout all history, throughout all of Israel, right? So much so, right? It's, it says their own deeds are before my face, right? I mean, you want to think of God as some man with a beard sitting up in the sky, you can do that, I guess, right? I mean, think of how much sin there has to be for it to reach the face of God, right? I mean, the point is, right? I mean, anywhere God is looking, he's just seeing the sins of Israel, right? And they're not thinking that way, right? They're thinking very individualistically, likely because of the syncretism with these pagan religions. So everything else you have, it's not really a fill in the blank. It's just mostly people's names. And some of these people's names are listed twice, and that's not a typo this time. Even though normally it would be.
This time?
Yeah, this time. Emphasis on the this time. So, right, we'll sort of talk about this. So continuing on this train of thought of, okay, God is condemning corporate Israel, right? We have in verse 4 of chapter 7, it says, they are all adulterers. So again, all of Israel. Verse 7 of chapter 7, they are all hot like an oven. And this is really where we're going to start to get into all these people's names and get into a lot of history, but I promise you it's all relevant, so try to stick with me, okay? The idea, right, of they're all hot like an oven and have devoured their judges, all their kings have fallen, none among them calls upon me, right? The idea here, it's this turnover of leadership, right? I mean, we talked about this week 1, and, I've also brought this up in some of the Sunday morning sermons that I've done recently, and pretty sure we've covered this besides chapter 1 in Hosea. Very big theme in Hosea, and also, I mean, just other books of the Bible dealing with this time period. There's a lot of political turnover, right? And so this whole, they've devoured all their judges, all their kings have fallen. This is true, right? Historically true. The last king of the southern kingdom, right? Hosea is talking to the northern kingdom, but if you go back to the prologue, right? The last king of the southern kingdom that's listed in chapter 1 is Hezekiah. Hezekiah began his reign in 716 or 715 BC. Hezekiah different from Zechariah, so in order not to confuse yourself, if you're going to write that down, maybe write that in the margin or something. Just a fair warning. But Hezekiah, his reign began in 716, 715. Jeroboam II, which is the only king from the northern kingdom, which Hosea was talking to, the only king listed for the northern kingdom, his reign ended between 753 and 746 BC. We don't really know. There's, like with most kings, there's a lot of debate. And this is a quote that I used when we covered chapter 1, but I'll say it again. The rapid changes in leadership in the north after Jeroboam II's death may have been confusing to many southerners of the era after Samaria's fall. And so it would be ignorable by the writer of verse 1 of chapter 1. So you have anywhere basically taking the earlier date of, let's say, Jeroboam II's reign ended in 753 to, the last king of the south mentioned in the prologue of Hosea, which is Hezekiah, who began his reign in 716, 715, right? I mean, we have quite a long time there where there's not another northern king listed, right? And so you have a lot of time to work with. So what kind of rapid changes, from that quote that I just read, what kind of rapid changes are we talking about? Well, once again, this political instability, this, backstabbing murder. So Jeroboam, the second successor, Zechariah. This is the first bullet-pointed guy you have. Jeroboam the second dies. This guy named Zechariah takes over. He ruled for a whopping 6 months before he was assassinated. All right. Zechariah, he ruled for 6 whole months before he was assassinated. He was assassinated by a guy named Shallum. Shallum then became king, and he ruled for a whopping 1 month before he was assassinated. He was assassinated by a guy named Menahem. Now, Menahem is kind of unique in that he actually was not assassinated. He ruled for 10 years. So, given the last two guys, that's an improvement for sure. He was not assassinated. But Menahem's son, Pekahai, it's on your sheet. You can figure out how to pronounce it how you wish.
Pekahiah.
Pekahiah.
If you spelled it right, it's Pekahiah. Right? Pekahiah.
It's all Hebrew to me, man. I don't know.
It's written in English.
So that's Menahem's son. So Menahem wasn't assassinated. His son took over, ruled for 2 years. So better than the 6 months and the 1 month. Not quite as good as his dad, who ruled for 10 years. He ruled for 2 years, and he was assassinated by a guy named Pekah. That's right. Pekah was assassinated by Hosea. And Hosea was the last king of the northern kingdom of Israel before Assyria's takeover, before the conquest, before the exile, before the fall of Samaria, right? So quite literally when it says, right, Israel was like an oven, devouring their judges and all their kings have fallen. Quite literally, I mean, right, this happened, right? This was happening. This did happen. This would continue to happen, right? From the time of when Hosea was giving this. Not only were they like an oven in the sense that they all corporately have broken the covenant, but like we said, that there is this political instability of, right, I'm going to murder you and then I'm going to become king. And then 6 months later, someone's going to murder me and become king. And a year later, someone's going to murder them and become king. On and on and on.
History of the world.
It goes. Yeah, pretty much. So moving into verse 8, we have this Ephraim language once again, right? Ephraim has mixed himself among the peoples. Ephraim is a cake unturned. So what isn't in view here, likely, is, what likely isn't in view is intermarriage, right? That would happen after the Assyrian conquest, during the exile, kind of after the exile, right? When they just kind of decided to settle down and intermarry and start a family, right? That's likely not what's in view here. Think again, you have these rapid changes in leadership, right? Kings being assassinated, their assassins taking their place. That's a really dumb rule to have, by the way. If you could just kill a guy, you can take his position of authority. I'm very glad that we don't have that. Anyway, that's off topic, though. That's a topic for a completely different thing. But think about these rapid changes in leadership. In addition, with the rapid changes in leadership came rapid changes in policy, right? I mean, we're kind of familiar with this in America because, I mean, every 4 to 8 years, we get a new guy in office and certain policies will change, right? But even with that, it's still kind of lost on us because, I mean, it's not like, say the new person in office. It's crazy to me that this is an election year because this has been like the most non-eventful election year recently for me. I don't really keep up with the news, so that might be part of it. But anyway, again, digressing. Just pretend like we get a completely different person in office. Not Trump, not Biden, someone completely new. Mickey Mouse runs for president. He wins by a landslide. All right. Mickey Mouse cannot just come in and completely change everything about our country, right? I mean, we have these checks and balances, right? Not entirely the case with ancient Israel. So we think we kind of understand, oh, new guy in power, new rules. But it was like way worse back then because there wasn't like a Congress where they had to decide things as much. Getting off track, and I apologize. But the point is, right, in addition with the rapid changes in leadership came rapid changes specifically in alliances with foreign nations. All right. That's why your last 3 bullet points are this guy's alliance, this guy's alliance, this guy's alliance. So think back to Menahem, right? That was what we said, the only guy not to be assassinated. To be fair, Hosea, we don't know if he was outright assassinated. He was taken captive during the Assyrian conquest. We don't really know what his fate was. I mean, likely at some point he was killed by Assyria. In that sense, I guess that would be an assassination, but we don't really know. But for all intents and purposes, we're going to call Menahem the only guy since Jeroboam II not to be assassinated. So Menahem, his rule began in either 745 BC or 752 BC and ended in either 738 BC or 742 BC. That's a lot of numbers. Bear with me. Tiglath-Pileser III, right? Ruler of Assyria for a while. His rule began in 745 BC. So Tiglath-Pileser III's rule began, this is the important part, either began the same year as Menahem or 7 years after Menahem's rule began. Meaning Menahem was the first king of Israel that Assyria dealt with and that Tiglath-Pileser III dealt with. So this is what you want to write down by Menahem's alliance. 2 Kings 15:19. 2 Kings 15:19 says, Then Pul, king of Assyria, that's Tiglath-Pileser, but likely his personal, less formal name. Then Pul, king of Assyria, invaded the land, and Menahem gave him 1,000 talents of silver to gain his support and strengthen his own hold on the kingdom. So this offering, it's recorded in 2 Kings. It's also recorded in the annals of Tiglath-Pileser. So we have extra biblical evidence for this as well. So Menahem's alliance, he made an alliance with Assyria. He made an alliance with Tiglath-Pileser. And if only he knew how bad that would come to bite Israel later down the line. So that kind of starts the whole Assyria problem, right? You can't really blame the guy because, I mean, had he not paid the tribute offering, they probably would have been wiped out a lot sooner than they did. But, you know, it is what it is. So, right, you have Menahem, you have Pekahiah. I know you want to make some comment about the pronunciation or whatever. Skip him, right? Nothing really changes. Pekah, all right? So we're 2 removed from Menahem. Pekah comes along a little bit later, and he makes an alliance of his own. So Pekah allied with the king of Aram, which is, just think of it as Syria, basically. All right? So Pekah and the king of Aram, they marched on Jerusalem, the southern kingdom, right? Pekah being king of the north, this guy from Aram just being, you know, over in Syria, right? They start an alliance. They're marching on Jerusalem. They're marching on the southern kingdom, all right? The southern kingdom's ruler at the time was Ahaz. And Ahaz, he doesn't think he can win this, right? I mean, the southern kingdom's army versus the army of the northern kingdom and the army of Aram or Syria. So he calls on Tiglath-Pileser, right? He calls up his old buddy from Assyria. He says, hey, man, if we pay you a bunch of money, will you come save us and, you know, go defeat Aram or go defeat Syria for us? So that's what happened. Tiglath-Pileser ended up capturing Damascus, which, Damascus, Syria, if you know your geography, there you go. Deported all the people who lived in Damascus, killed the ruler of Aram, who, by the way, Pekah made an alliance with when they marched on Jerusalem, then went to Israel, the northern kingdom, where Pekah was at, and ended up taking some territory there and exiling those people. 2 Kings 15, I did not write down the verse, so my apologies. But it says, in the time of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took, more biblical names, Ijon, Abel, Beth, Makkah, Genoa, Kadesh, and Hazor. He took Gilead and Galilee, including all the land of Naphtali, and deported the people to Assyria. So obviously we think of the Assyrian exile as, okay, well, Samaria, the capital of the north, falls, and then the exile happens. But there were these lesser exiles that happened even before that. And we see this all the way in Pekah's day, right? All because he made this really dumb alliance with the king of Aram and marched on Jerusalem. So, and this is also recorded in the history of Tiglath-Pileser. So we have extra biblical evidence for this as well. Pekah's successor, Hosea, remember the last king of the northern kingdom of Israel before it eventually fell to Assyria. Hosea also tried making a foreign alliance. So we have Menahem who did the alliance with Assyria. I'm going to pay you all this money. Please don't kill us. Pekah made an alliance with Syria or Aram, marched on Jerusalem. That ended badly. So then you have Hosea who comes into the picture. And 2 Kings 17 records, I also didn't write down the verse for this, so I apologize. But 2 Kings 17 records that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up to attack Hosea. So we're not dealing with Tiglath-Pileser anymore. He's died. We got a new guy in power. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up to attack Hosea, who had been Shalmaneser's vassal and had paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria discovered that Hosea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, a king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore Shalmaneser seized him and put him in prison. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. In the ninth year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Halah and Gozan on the Habor River and in the towns of the Medes. So that is the big exile that we think about, right? Samaria falls, the people are captured, they're sent away, they're exiled, they're deported, right? That's the big exile that we think about. And all this happened because Hosea made an alliance with Egypt, right? My actually, they weren't even related at that point, so I can't say great-great-granddaddy. But, the king, however many generations before me, started this whole mess. He started an alliance with Assyria, started paying these guys off not to kill us. Hosea says, I'm tired of that. I'm not going to give any money to Assyria. I'm going to give them money to Egypt. Right? Assyria finds out about that. And what happens? They smoke them, right? Samaria falls, the people are exiled, right? Not just to Assyria, but also, other places as well. So, all of this to say, right, we see that not only does Israel's monarchy constantly change, right? They are all hot like an oven and have devoured their judges. All their kings have fallen, right? Not only do we have that going on, but also Israel's foreign policy is constantly changing during this time, right? Ephraim has mixed himself among the peoples, Hosea writes. Ephraim also is like a silly dove without sense. And this is, ding, 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 right? You have mention of what I just said. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria, right? And all this is backed up historically. But even though they call out to Egypt and they go to Assyria, it ends with ultimately, wherever they go, I will spread my net on them, right? God talking, of course. So Israel's condemned because, right, verse 10, they do not return to the Lord their God, which corresponds to verse 4, which says, right, they're all adulterers, right? So Israel's condemned because of this corporate rejection of God, this corporate covenantal disobedience, which goes back to what I was saying about the whole individualistic way of thinking from your first bullet point of them saying, well, yeah, I mean, I don't do that, you know. Yeah, I mean, maybe I like, you know, I might beat my dog, but, you know, I've never like beat a person, you know, using a goofy example or whatever, right? But it's this corporate condemnation of Israel. Also, they're condemned because it says they do not seek me for this, right? Verse 10, the pride of Israel testifies to his face, but they do not return to the Lord their God. So, adultery aspect from verse 4, corporate condemnation. Also, nor seek him for this, nor seek him for all this. All this, of course, being, right, political stability, right? They're seeking Egypt. They're seeking Assyria, right? They're seeking Syria. But they're not seeking God for all this, right? And, you know, the rest of the chapter, I mean, verses 12, which I talked about a little bit, you know, 13, 14, 15, 16, it's all more of just God calling out this misplaced trust. You know, misplaced trust in foreign rebellion as opposed to God. Also more of calling out this corporate rebellion, right? Which includes the murder of the kings, right? Again, I mean, that's something, you know. Well, I've never murdered a king. I've never killed some guy and then taken his place. No, but you are all adulterers, right? And you all have, right, what is, I'm trying to find the right verse. I don't know. It's probably in my notes at some point. You all have turned away from me, basically, is the point, right? Verse 13, woe to them, for they have fled from me. Oh, this is it, right? Because they have transgressed against me, verse 13, right? Because they have transgressed against me, right? Oh, I've never murdered a king. No, but you're all adulterers, verse 4, and verse 13, you've all transgressed against me. Verse 14, they rebel against me. Verse 15, they devise evil against me. Verse 16, their princes shall fall by the sword. So again, getting into that political instability aspect, right? So chapter 7, I mean, there's a lot here that you can pick up with just a face value reading of like, okay, they were doing some pretty shady stuff. But I mean, when you get into the history of it, okay, they were constantly turning over kings at some point every couple months, right? If not every couple years. And then also they were making alliances with everybody but God. I mean, you know, this is, you know, these are the people that like enslaved you for like 400 years and that like, you know, in your religion, like the biggest miracle to ever happen is the fact that you got freed from being enslaved to these people. And now you're going to turn around and say, hey, I'm a paid buddy to you, so you'll like me. So that way, if Assyria attacks us, you'll come in and help us because we're paying you all this money, right? I mean, they're literally turning to everybody but God. So it's this corporate condemnation of Judah for not only just, you know, what we see in the last half of verse 1, not only because of the fraud and the theft and the robbery, but this corporate condemnation for ultimately putting their trust in every single thing but God. So anyway, anything I need to clarify or anyone wants to ask or anything I need to repeat as far as bullet points or anything?
You only have 2 on there, so.
Well, I mean,
the bullet point.
Yeah.
But, you know, God warned them not to make alliances.
Yeah.
And they made plenty of them.
Well, I mean, even this is a warning to some degree because, yeah, I mean, we don't know exactly when Hosea was written, but it was written before the fall of the Northern Kingdom. So, I mean, when it says they called to Egypt, I mean, this was given likely before Hosea actually made a alliance with Egypt, right? So, anyway. But you were talking about God warned them, and God warned them before, and God is
And they
warning
did
them
it big time, and they paid for it.
Yeah,
big time.
God warned them before, and God also is warning them here, likely before it happens. So,
He warns them again.
okay. In that case, I will hand it off for the prayer time.
Saw that. My goodness.
I just turned that on for 1 degree, change it, but it never knows when to shut off. So it's cool in here. Okay, we'll share our prayer requests, and then close in prayer tonight. Just kind of an overview or update on some of these. I don't have any update on the Wilsons, but I know they've got serious things going on, and still Joe Higgins they've not found anything since they did that CAT scan on him. What, 6 or 8 weeks ago now? It's been a while. Talked to Frank Evans yesterday. He is home, and he's doing very well. He was very upbeat and everything, and usually it sounds real depressed when I've been talking to him, but he was doing real well. My brother was home, and I think he moved his home again, but I haven't talked to him since. Landon, still no communication with your brother?
He sent out a newsletter thing, I think.
Okay, I need to see if I'm on his email list or something.
He did send out a newsletter?
I think so.
I'll have to check.
I'm not on his newsletter thing. But,
You're not on his list?
no, I'm not. But I think he did send one out this week. So.
Because I gave him my email so he could.
I gave him mine too. Maybe he lost the list. We just need to check on that, I guess. Okay, then let's keep Kathy in our prayers. She's doing very well, and
Yes, she is.
her eyes still continuing to do good. And then Israel and Gaza always, that's just ongoing things there. Ukraine and Russia and Pastor Oleg, just keep them in our prayers. Unspoken, we had more unspoken.
I still have one.
Okay, and I know we had one answered prayer was LaDonna Hicks.
Well,
I don't know what it was, but
not
she
exactly.
she put a praise on
I
Facebook.
know,
but I didn't know what it
I
was.
threw a monkey wrench in the works, and it's been postponed again.
Really? So it looked like it was going to be good, and then
Yeah,
and who put the monkey wrench?
the daughter.
The daughter.
Crystal, her daughter.
She convinced the judge.
I don't know
to
how
hold
she
it
gets
off.
by with that.
Hold off or something. I don't know.
This is typical Rogers County.
It's terrible.
It's typical.
They don't
That's
get
a
anything
shame.
done.
We have men over in the jail been there for over 3 years
Oh my.
waiting for stuff.
Well, have they been convicted?
I don't know, but evidently it's not been finished, or they would have been gone already. But I've talked to 1 or 2 of them that's been there for 3 years in there.
That's
They've
ridiculous.
not been sentenced to another facility or anything, huh?
Well, if they
No.
haven't been sentenced, how can they keep holding them like that?
Until it's finished here, they
afford
can't
to pay
move.
bail.
Yeah, they just can't move.
Or there isn't a bail available. I mean, depending on.
Yeah, some of those don't have any.
They will
But,
get credit for that time served.
yeah, they will. Yeah,
But then if they're innocent, that's wasted time.
I know a man who was in there for a year. I came back from South Africa, had to had to have knee surgery, and then did jury duty, and I got kicked off because I knew the guy was on trial. I met him the week before in jail ministry, so I got kicked off. But my cousin was on there. He had been there for a year, went to trial. And the trial lasted for 2 weeks, which was excessively long. And he was found not guilty. And they kept him in jail till January because he hadn't paid any child support, which he didn't have any going before he went into prison.
How was he going to pay child support in from
Yeah,
the jail?
and all that came about while he was in it for a year, being innocent.
That just doesn't make sense
No, it's
at all.
if we ever needed to pray for a system of justice, yeah,
Messed up.
that would be ours. Would be one of them.
Reform sounds like.
Well, and people talk about in other parts of the state. They talk about how things are here in the judicial system. I don't know why it doesn't change, but it doesn't. Jax Crabb, remember him in our prayers. Cindy Hubbard, and then Bob Thiel and his family. Jim Writings, still the same.
Yes. Keep him and my sister on your prayers.
Okay, did you ever find out? Did he actually have a fractured vertebrae, or what
He
was?
said he had 2 broken vertebrae, whatever that means.
Yep,
I need
he
to
fractures
call him again.
probably.
I gave him the name of that procedure. He was gonna check on
Kyphoplasty.
it.
You can actually go on YouTube and watch them do that to other people.
I think I'll pass on that.
There, I mean,
Okay.
well, it's not horrible. I mean, you know, well, they don't show all that part, but they show it going in and it's illustrated and all that. But I guarantee you, if he needs something like that and he's a candidate for it, he'd be well worth his while to do it. I'd recommend it. Okay, Janet Coates. I had a real recent update on her situation, but she was doing okay the last time I heard something, but she still is not in good shape. Leslie Ames and family, Karen Ritchie, Adam Peters. He just has ongoing medical, his heart stuff. He's had a stroke. He has diabetes, and he had a great big sore about that big on the bottom of his foot the last time, about a month ago. So bad stuff there. And then Roseanne, I had an update there. And Bud Carrion is back in a nursing home. Then Nancy Burns and the family of Joanne Compston, that should have an S in there. And then Al Casto, again, keep him in our prayers. We prayed for him before. And Austin Clinton, I talked to is Diane his mother, right? Or grandmother. Yeah, I saw her outside this morning, and she said he's home and he's doing a whole lot better than he did the first time that they did that. So he's doing better. And then this young man named Tate has breathing problems. I haven't heard anything there. Then all the storm damage and all that's gone on there. And then finally, I have one from the jail ministry from today. Had a group with 5 men came in, and after we got through with the lesson, one young man asked about, well, you know, he professes to know the Lord, but he asked the question, well, who is Jesus? This other man, you know, that's big with me, who is John chapter 1. This other man that came in there with him, he said, and he was adamant, I couldn't convince him otherwise. He said, Jesus is the devil. And he was serious.
Said Jesus is one.
The devil.
My goodness.
Yeah, he was disturbed, I think. But, yeah. So pray for that. Pray for that young man. I'll just say, all I'll say about his name is his first name is Corey. But,
What pod was this?
huh?
What pod was this?
J-Pod.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
He's Cherokee, I think. Cherokee, and
We know who you're talking
have you met him?
Yeah, well, I mean, we met him. I mean, if it's the person I'm thinking of, he hasn't said anything that out there yet. But
Well, he did today.
there is a guy that I think from J-Pod who, he has some pretty interesting interpretations.
Real short hair here and long hair going back like that.
Probably.
Well-
there's a guy I know that has some pretty interesting interpretations of things.
Well, if he's the same one, we really just remember to pray for Corey, because I mean it was bad, and I quoted some serious scripture to him. I said, well, that statement is blasphemy, and kind of on things like that. And the other guys in there, they're just kind of shaking their heads at him and stuff. That came in with him out of the same pod, but do pray for all the jail ministry. There's a lot that goes on, and the men did take up the second pod, which was H pod, had two come in from that, and they have been sharing the gospel and everything with a lot of other guys, and there's at least 3 more guys in there that they have reached because of that. So just pray for the jail ministry. It's always a big need. Everything in there is a big need. But anyone else? Any other?
Well, we had praises for the 2 new baby girls that were born. And then we've still got 5 babies due.
2 down and 5 to go.
Yeah.
Who's the 2 that were born?
Wilma's great-grandson and Jennifer Smith's grandson.
Yeah, I got to
Granddaughter.
spend the day with mine, and I just had a blast.
I
She's
bet.
the sweetest little thing. She just eats and sleeps, and that's it.
For now.
Yeah.
Enjoy it while you got them.
Yeah. But she's precious. She really is.
Okay, and 5 more expecting babies later this year.
Yeah.
So remember all that. Anyone else? Any others? Well, if not, let's do. Some of you know that I'm going to have surgery on my back Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning, they're going to do that. So remember that in prayer, if you will. It'll fix that, and I hope and pray that there's not another one.
Is that going to be out?
It is outpatient, and it's actually done in the clinic and not in the hospital. Bill usually takes me.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to take me
I
Tuesday?
think so.
Okay. Well, you better know so. At least by Sunday, give me a
I'll
chance.
take you. I don't know if I can bring you back.
You might have to hitchhike back home.
I can float back.
He'll get his back up though.
Yeah, they probably won't let me do that. Well, let's bow for prayer then. Father, we're thankful and grateful as we've come here this evening and had this time in your word together. And we, Father, just remember Israel and times past and how you called to them and how you sent prophets to them and how you sent messages to them. You sent warnings to them. You gave them promises over and over. But Father, the sinful hearts of all people all over the earth are the same as their hearts. And Father, they rebelled against you, and you worked through the nations all around them. And Father, you brought to them to their knees. And we just pray, Father, that even we in our own world today, that you would bring just grace and mercy in times of great trouble. We pray for each of these that we have on our prayer sheet and just ask, Lord, that you would bless them and help them in their time of need. We ask, Father, you'll bless us as we go from here tonight, as we come back again on Sunday. And we just pray, Lord, that you're glorified in everything. And we do ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.